The United States and Russia say a ceasefire will come into force in Syria this coming weekend. Hostilities will end just after midnight on Saturday, the 27th of February. ISIL and the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front are not involved. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the impetus for the talks came from Russia. However, he adds, the interest was mutual. During the course of the conversation, as co-organizers of the International Syria Support Group, we formalized the joint statements of Russia and the US on the ceasefire in the country. Some are already saying the plan is flawed. The concern is the government and its allies will continue to target rebel forces on the ground under the pretext of fighting the exempt groups.
We know that there are a lot of obstacles and there are sure to be some setbacks. After all, for years we have been trying to reach a diplomatic resolution to the many problems that plague that nation that has broken apart. But this is a moment of opportunity.
And while the politicians talk, on the streets the death toll continues to mount. More than 150 died in bombings in Homs and Damascus on Sunday alone. The United Nations has welcomed news of the imminent ceasefire in Syria. However, officials admit monitoring the truce could be a big challenge for the organization.
Resolution 2254 at all. So there are different ways of approaching this. And so we hope that all three elements will be well implemented, bearing in mind that for us, in regard to humanitarian access to besieged areas and also the need to release those who are arbitrarily detained, such as women and children, these elements are not conditional. They should not be conditional, and they should take place immediately in terms of access to besieged areas as well as release of women, children and the aged.
Syria's northern neighbor Turkey has welcomed the US and Russia brokered plan. We hope this ceasefire will continue positively, he says, and no one will try to carry out airstrikes and kill innocent people while the ceasefire continues. We hope all the groups in Syria, including the moderate opposition, will take part in rebuilding the country at the end of the negotiations that will continue for 6 months. Russian bombing has transformed the 5-year-old Syrian conflict in favor of Moscow's ally, Bashar al-Assad. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has called parliamentary elections to be held on April the 13th. The announcement came shortly after news of the ceasefire brokered by Washington and Moscow. The last parliamentary elections to be held in Syria were in 2012. It was the first poll in which multiple parties and not just the Ba'ath Party were allowed to stand. However, the majority of the 250 deputies elected were from the governing party.
US Republican presidential contender Ted Cruz has fired his main spokesman ahead of the Nevada caucuses. It's over a video that falsely showed rival Marco Rubio dismissing the Bible. Spokesman Rick Tyler had apologized for posting an inaccurate story on the video. Rubio, meanwhile, is enjoying some boosts, not only from the Cruz campaign mishap. He's also secured a string of high-profile endorsements from prominent Republicans. Rubio came second in South Carolina's primary on Saturday. Donald Trump was the big winner in that state, securing a comfortable margin of victory. Opinion polls show Rubio and Cruz running close in Nevada.
Wow, this is something, wow!
In Calais, people living in the migrant camp are still unsure of what will happen to their makeshift homes. A French judge is set to rule on the legality of a local order to evacuate the southern area of the jungle, as it is known, by 2000 hours on Tuesday. Charities contend there are more people living in the area than the authorities estimate. The southern zone goes straight from the Rue de Garenne to the Chemin des Dunes. It's a big square, which represents about half the jungle in terms of surface area. But it's 2/3 of the jungle in terms of population, because we counted 3,400 people in the southern zone and 1,900 in the northern zone. Authorities want to move the people living there to newly installed heated containers and other temporary accommodation elsewhere in France. Under the local ruling, they could remove the tents if necessary by force. But charities argue the notice period was insufficient and that evicting vulnerable people in midwinter contravenes their basic rights.
As more and more border controls are introduced amid Europe's migrant crisis, dominoes are falling all the way to Greece. Around 800 Afghan migrants are stuck near the Greek border town of Idomeni after the neighbouring former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia started blocking their entry. The frustration and despair is plain to see.
When we asked to leave us to cross the border, they said this is temporary. But it's been 4 days that we are in here.
We don't need food, just we want to cross the borders.
Further north, hundreds of Afghan migrants who've made it into Macedonia are waiting to get into Serbia, but it's also said to have blocked their entry. Meanwhile, the Slovenian army is being sent to guard the border with Croatia. And the migrants keep coming. This one of the latest ships to arrive in Greece. They normally use this as a launch pad into more prosperous Western Europe, but the beefed up border controls further north now stand in their way. With the dominoes falling, Athens is worried the number of migrants trapped here will just keep rising.
United Kingdom Prime Minister David Cameron has laid out the case for the UK to remain in the European Union to MPs in Parliament. It was a keenly anticipated debate which analysts believed would show the scale of divisions in the Conservative Party over membership of the bloc.
Our special status means that Britain can have the best of both worlds. We will be in the parts of Europe that work for us, influencing the decisions that affect us, in the driving seat of the world's biggest single market, and with the ability to take action to keep our people safe. But we will be out of the parts of Europe that do not work for us, out of the euro, out of the Eurozone bailouts, out of the passport-free, no-borders Schengen area, and permanently and legally protected from ever being part of an ever closer union.
The Prime Minister stressed the decision of the referendum would be final and that there could be no second chance. He said his support to remain in the EU was because he was standing up for Britain and he had no other agenda. That was interpreted as a swipe at London Mayor Boris Johnson. His much publicised decision to campaign for Britain to leave the EU has been seen by some as a tactical move in a bid to replace David Cameron as leader of the party. The PM has already said he will step down before the next election. The debate in the House of Commons was the first of the political clashes on the road to the ballot, which will take place on June the 23rd.
A deal has been struck to end deadly protests which have paralysed a northern state in India and cut water supplies to Delhi's 20 million residents. There's been rioting and looting across Haryana as members of the rural Jat community demand more government jobs and college places. According to a Jat leader, protesters have reached an agreement with state and federal officials to end their action, in which more than a dozen people have been killed and more than 150 injured. The young generation of the Jat community is in danger of losing out, he says. We're demanding this for the younger generation. The government should immediately grant us affirmative action jobs. Meanwhile, Indian government forces have secured a canal in Haryana that provides more than half of Delhi's water needs. Engineers are repairing parts of a reservoir damaged during the protests of recent days.
The funeral has taken place in Israel of Samuel Willenberg. He was one of only 67 people known to have survived the notorious Nazi death camp Treblinka in Poland. The president of Israel, Reuven Rivlin, called him a symbol of heroism who had the strength to rebuild his life in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Samuel Willenberg died on Friday in Israel, aged 93, the last survivor of Treblinka. In 1942, he was among 6,000 Jews who arrived at the camp by train. He was assigned to labour duties and so avoided an early death. Mr. Willenberg escaped by clambering over bodies piled up by a fence as the Nazis shot prisoners during a mass breakout. He hid in the surrounding countryside before reaching Warsaw and joining the Polish underground. He returned to the site in 2013 to mark 70 years since his escape and urged the world never to forget Treblinka. His two sisters were killed there, among 870,000 people who died in the gas chambers, more than anywhere else except Auschwitz.
Aid agencies are rushing to distribute supplies in Fiji, ravaged at the weekend by Cyclone Winston, which left at least 29 dead. These people in Raki on the country's main island are the lucky ones. Many others scattered around the archipelago are much harder to reach. Authorities say the storm was the most powerful on record in the southern hemisphere. Whole villages were flattened by winds of over 300 kilometers an hour. Flimsy dwellings stood no chance. Thousands of Fijians are now doing what they can to salvage their possessions.
We were inside the house, so it was very strong. Damaged everything, so we have to run for our life in the church.
Schools have been closed for 2 weeks, but the destruction means it's bound to be a lot longer before many are up and running again.
We have some very poor students, and I think it'll be very sad for them to see that their schools have been damaged as such, and I don't know if they'll let the students come to the school or find other schools that are available.
Aid workers have warned of possible outbreaks of Zika and dengue viruses, both carried by mosquitoes which flourish in stagnant water. There are fears the death toll could rise once remote islands are reached.
Turning heads in Barcelona. The latest in virtual reality technology is a star of the show at the Mobile World Congress event. The likes of Samsung and LG Electronics have also been unveiling their latest smartphones as they seek to stem a slump in the industry. You can see a very clear break towards the Internet of Things compared to recent years, says this visitor. The world of wearables is concentrated in a few companies. I'm personally interested in the consumer world. I've seen smartphones and devices. They don't have much more to give in terms of innovation because they're already way ahead. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg made a surprise appearance, saying there's still work to do to get the world connected.
You know, it's kind of crazy that we're sitting here in 2016 and still 4 billion people in the world, are we still working here? All right, 4 billion people in the world don't have access to the internet.
Zuckerberg also announced a partnership with Samsung, working together on virtual reality and 360 video. This as the tech giant launched 2 new versions of its Galaxy S smartphone. LG unveiled a virtual reality headset too, along with a drone controller to pair with its new G5 smartphones. Mobile is everything. That's the slogan of the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, says our reporter. This year, more than ever, the smartphone is at the core of everything. Now, a device that allows you to interact with your own life, always and everywhere.